So when it comes to the 007 games, I have gone on record and said that I feel 007 Nightfire is probably one of the best Bond games I've ever played. But realistically, during the 6th generation, EA was damn near batting 100 when they held the license to this series. It seemed like each game they pumped out was just getting better and better. It was a great time to be a 007 video game fan, and the game that came after Nightfire was easily the team's most ambitious title yet. So much so that it rivals Nightfire's quality that I constantly go back and forth between what I feel is the better game. That game being Everything or Nothing. When it comes to licensed games based on TV or movies, it's extremely rare when we're able to see a game manage to capture the essence of both forms of media. Either it's playing more like a game, or it tries to follow too closely to the IP's roots, leaving the gameplay feeling lesser. Everything or Nothing is one of those few times where a game was able to strike a perfect balance, all the while still being faithful to the franchise it's based off of. In fact, many, myself included, will say that it's probably the first time where a 007 game is just as good as its movies, and in many ways feels like the true 5th Pierce Brosnan movie. EA went all out. They hired all of the then regulars, Pierce, Judi Dench, John Cleese, but they also got some major talents for the newcomers, such as William Dafoe as the main villain, Shannon Elizabeth as the main Bond girl, and a couple others who were popular at the time. Cleese's Q was always a highlight since they gave him lines for every gadget, explaining what they do, all the while taking jabs at Bond here and there. And it just reminds me how much of a shame it was that they didn't actually bring him back after Die Another Day. But nonetheless, getting this all-star cast really did sell the movie feel for a game like this. By this point, they had been playing the roles for so long now that it just felt really natural in my opinion. Well, for the most part. And its story was definitely crafted with 007 fans in mind. If you watch the movies over the years, then you'll spot so many little things that they included in this plot, ranging from a view to a kill, the world is not enough. Hell, having Jaws come back as a henchman and actually getting Richard Kiel's likeness for it was brilliant. I know when it comes to gaming, Oddjob is probably the most iconic henchman in the series due to his midget appearance in Rare's GoldenEye, but when it comes to the movies, I'd argue that Jaws is probably the most memorable villain. The towering being with metal teeth that could bite through anything, let alone kill a person who appeared in not one but 2 movies due to his favorable appearance. Jaws as a character was interesting to say the least. He rarely ever talked and was a mute except for one line at the end of the 2nd movie, so Richard had to convey the character through his actions, and what we got was an intimidating killer that didn't have no personal vendetta or even hated Bond that much. It was just a job, and he really enjoyed this job where he was able to actually pull off some comedic elements, mixed in with his knack for being able to survive everything from being electrocuted to literally biting a shark to kill it. And when you see stuff like that, you know that this kind of character could transition to a game perfectly, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So 007 Everything or Nothing is another shooter with some focus on stealth, but unlike what has been coming before, as you can see this isn't a first-person shooter, but third-person. Something that hadn't been really done for the series since Tomorrow Never Dies on the PS1. I never played that game so I can't really comment on it, but if it plays anything like this game does, then I'll have to check it out, cause Everything or Nothing is a major expansion when it comes to the game mechanics. Now that there is a new perspective, certain things that were normal to do in first person would now be potentially clunky, or not work well at all, while in other ways it allows the player to do new things. First off, the shooting. Whenever you want to shoot someone, now you lock onto them first. Then you can move the aiming reticle within the circle with the C-stick, potentially aiming for the head and a moving target. So just go at a classic Resident Evil style and just lock on and shoot until the guy's dead. Or if you want to be stealthy, take your time and aim for the head with a silenced gun. It is an interesting mechanic. This was a couple years before games like Uncharted would just let you free aim whenever you want. So it does feel kind of archaic nowadays, but I do enjoy the idea of locking onto an enemy, then popping them in the head. This was the game that made me a huge fan of the simplisticness of a silenced handgun. Just being able to take cover and snipe enemies that are too far for me to take down physically is always a good feeling. But unfortunately, this does come at the cost of no free aim in this game. I mean, sure, you can essentially fire from the hip and just hope one of your bullets hit, but like I said, this can feel very archaic in that regard. Definitely sucks when an enemy gets too close, but not close enough where you can just melee them. Speaking of, Bond's fighting skills have definitely improved. Now he can left or right hook depending on the trigger button, can grab and throw enemies, and can even counter them if timed right. In fact, you'll be rewarded for countering enough times where Bond will go into this kind of like a berserker mode, where all of his melee moves become a lot more deadlier, and will usually be able to take people down in one move. He'll also be able to use melee weapons too, whether to throw them at his enemies, or use the trusty crowbar, and it's just as painful as it sounds. One of the main features you'll use a decent amount of is this mode called Bond Sense. Now, it isn't like detective mode in, say, the Arkham Batman games, but here, whenever you activate it, time will slow down to a crawl, which will allow you to survey your surroundings, select your gun more easily, and potentially lock onto environmental hazards that you couldn't normally. To me, I really enjoy this mechanic. It's a cool approach to display the idea of Bond's heightened spy senses without it feeling completely busted, and gives you a breather to check things out and try to make the right call for what to do next. Sure, there is no timer to it, so some may feel it lessens the challenge, but you'll be surprised how much that isn't the case. I'm sure anyone who's played has seen bullets flying at you slowly or a guard starting to run at you. It complements the experience I feel without having to resort to basically a pause screen. The other main feature that is introduced is the new cover mechanic. Again, very basic stuff by today's standards, as you actively have to push the Z button to hug a wall. But for a title that came out in 2003, it was very forward thinking, as it's 16 years later and it still feels very intuitive. In fact, a lot of this game surprisingly still holds up really well. I remember before I moved back to Ontario, I was playing this with my best bud, and he had never played this game before, and even for him, it clicked with him right away. He even said, if you weren't moving, I'd be borrowing this game. This feels kind of like Uncharted in a lot of ways, and really, that is like the best way for me to describe it. If you're into those kind of games, then you're gonna eat everything or nothing right up, because it's fairly similar, just a lot more emphasis on stealth and gadgets. As much as I adore Nightfire, I can admit that stealth portions, while pretty good, can be a little awkward until you know what you're doing. Here though, it's so much easier to do so as the game makes more of an effort to incorporate it. As long as the guards don't see you, hear gunfire, or are in alert mode, then you can potentially stealth kill every enemy in the stage, and it's as simple as crouching and pushing the melee button behind them. Or like I described earlier, take out Bond Silent's handgun and headshot him quickly before anyone can see the dead bodies. Once you start getting the hang of it, clearing out a room without engaging in a gunfight is so damn rewarding. It also helps that Bond's gadgets this time around are a lot more useful and less situational. No longer are there stuff like the laser watch or the grappling hook, but now you have stuff like the dart gun that puts enemies to sleep, thermal imaging to see enemies in the dark, and even a nanomachine suit to help you turn invisible for as long as your battery holds out, and as long as you're not shooting or making any fast movements. But the two you'll be using the most is the hook shot, which is as simple as it sounds, lets you shoot up at ledges allowing you to scale them, opening up the level design and providing some secrets if you can find those hook shot points. And the biggest gadget that you'll be getting the most out of is the Q Spider, a little portable remote control spider that allows Bond to scout ahead and search for his surroundings without being spotted, and get into areas that he can't get into on his own, whether it's to open up a locked door or retrieve a specific progression item. As time goes on, the Q Spider can get a few upgrades like being able to detonate if it does get spotted, that way you can just blow up a guard if they do try and squish it after being spotted. But it'll also get the dart gun and invisible nanomachines so that you can have more options when it comes to engaging the enemy. I really appreciate that they made the gadgets a lot more in-depth and useful this time around. If I could criticize Nightfire for anything, it's definitely how much of an afterthought the gadgets' practicalness were. And it is a nice compromise since the gun selection isn't anywhere near as plentiful. But hey, this game introduced so many cool mechanics to the series that I can't really complain that much. Just about everything feels like a major improvement, whether it's the story, structure, gameplay. Hell, even the driving sections are a lot more in-depth and interesting this time around. Can't ever go wrong with a motorcycle that has rockets and flamethrowers on each side, flying through the highway in an attempt to send Jaws in a tanker barreling into a watery grave that we all know he'll survive. But not everything is perfect. There are some elements that can feel like a step back more than just the weird omission of free aiming. First point I want to bring up is debatable since it does come down to personal preference, but that is this game's more linear approach to progression. So in some 007 titles, missions usually go about it where you have maybe 9 or 10 total, but they are a lot bigger in nature with a lot more sections. Everything or Nothing on the other hand are all broken up into segments. There's about 6 or 7 specific missions, but they're broken up into about 25 or so acts. I personally don't mind this approach since it feels like there's a lot more game in this title, and the segments do lend to a more structured experience. Plus, thankfully, the higher difficulties can lead to more objectives to complete. A nice callback to GoldenEye. But some people might not like the less linearness when it comes to this approach. So yeah, this one is definitely debatable. What isn't though, unfortunately, is a huge chunk of its multiplayer. Chances are, if you're buying a Bond game, then I would assume your intention is to enjoy a multiplayer experience. For many titles, that's basically one of the series' biggest selling points. Well, Everything or Nothing doesn't really do a traditional deathmatch player versus player style. Instead, opts out for 2 styles, 2-player co-op missions, and these small arena-like modes that are a fight to the death. And I am in such a love-hate scenario with Everything or Nothing's multiplayer, because when it comes to the co-op, it's actually really beefy. There's 3 full missions, each with 4 to 5 segments, where you and a partner go through them, killing enemies, solving objectives, and fighting potential bosses or enemy rushes. You'd think because it's multiplayer the missions would be half-assed or afterthoughts, but no, these are actually really in-depth. Each segment is a decent length, they all have different objectives to complete, and in the later missions, you get access to many of the gadgets too. These could have been full-on story missions for the most part, they were really well done. And they even include optional objectives like not being seen, have a certain accuracy percentage, etc., which will earn you points that'll unlock characters and stages for the arena mode. Ugh. Okay, well, let's be fair, Arena isn't necessarily a bad mode. In fact, I remember back when I used to play this a lot, Arena was actually quite a fun experience. Hell, even my mom got into it and loved playing it, and she never plays shooters or would have even touched the co-op mode. But is this really a proper alternative to what we got in Nightfire, or even GoldenEye? This just feels so damn limiting. Only 3 stages and majority of the characters you can unlock are only playable in Arena? Like straight up, out of all the characters you can unlock, only 2 or 3 of them are actually usable in the co-op mode. It makes no goddamn sense! And speaking of co-op, those points you earn in it. Sure, I like the idea since it gives you extra goals to shoot for, but after a while earning those points become a lot harder since you can't just replay the same mission and earn those points all over again. That's a one-time deal. So chances of you getting every unlockable is pretty damn near impossible. Cause not only do you have to be really good at the game, you also have to have a partner who's just as good and can coordinate well with you. I could never unlock everything in multiplayer, and honestly, that sucks. But lastly, while it was certainly doable since I did manage to do it back in the day, but oh my god, this part is so brutal on some missions in single player mode, and that is earning the platinum medals. I talked about this a little bit in my top 10 brick walls in gaming video, so I won't go too much into it again, but basically the idea is that after you beat each mission on the hardest difficulty and earn a gold medal, you can play it again with a new optional completion goal. This can range from taking only so much damage or none at all, beating it under a time limit, only using 10 shots, not being seen, etc. In concept, not a bad idea. It provides great replayability, and if you're able to get the platinum medals, then for every 2 you get, you'll unlock a new cheat code that you can use for free play. A pretty cool reward, especially when you literally earn essentially a platinum trophy with the platinum gun. Well, if you want challenge, then you got it, because in my opinion, some of these platinum requirements are the hardest things I've ever done in gaming. And you're talking to someone who actually did the big boss challenge in Metal Gear Solid 4, and some other ridiculous challenges. For some, hey, if you like torture and bullshit, then by all means, go for it. But never again. I got all the platinums back in the day, but you couldn't pay me enough to do that shit again. Granted, I know it's optional, but still, I don't think anyone playtested these platinum missions, cause some of them are damn near impossible, and I'm still amazed I was ever able to do it. But that was a quickish look at 007 Everything or Nothing. Now, while I made it clear many times that I feel Nightfire is probably the best game in the series, but that's viewing the product as a whole. Whereas this title, it's obviously missing one of the major selling points the series is known for, which is a proper deathmatch-like versus mode. But when it comes to a purely single-player experience, well, in my opinion, this is the best experience you could get in a Bond game. It's the first time where you feel like you're playing a movie, but still feels like a fulfilling gaming experience. It's flown under the radar over the years, but if you're into Bond games, Uncharted games, or even just third-person shooters in general, then you owe it to yourself to play Everything or Nothing. Cause really, it's damn near a Gen 7 game that was just somehow released during Gen 6 for consoles. It's that good of a game that it doesn't feel too dated at all. I highly recommend this game to anyone.